On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, U.S. Central Command struck 3 non-compliant vessels in the Gulf of Oman, killing 3 Indian crew members on board. In the meantime, President Trump is announcing a potential agreement with Iran over the Strait of Hormuz. Yada, yada, yada. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So we've been recapping the events happening week by week in the Strait of Hormuz, out on the blockade line with the U.S. Navy, and the development of this conflict that's been going on now since February 28th. The big development this week was the strikes. We're going to talk about the strikes. What do they mean? We're going to talk about what's happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz, and then we're going to recap what happened during week 14 leading up to today, June 14th, 2026. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So I want to take you over to the Joint Maritime Information Center report first, because we have the identity of the 3 ships attacked by the United States: the Marivex, the Settebello, and the Jolvir. We're going to look at each of these attacks and discuss them. So just to clarify here for a second, the United States has imposed a blockade on the Iranians. Now, they followed the letter of the law when it comes to a blockade. And this is the Newport Papers. This is international law of how to execute a blockade. One of the things that's happened during the course of this blockade is the U.S. is stopping the movement of ships to Iranian ports along the Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, and Gulf of Oman. The other thing that they have announced, and this came out in a JMIC, Joint Maritime Information Center advisory, is that ships that conduct ship-to-ship transfers, that is, remove fuel from Iranian vessels and load it within their hulls, will be subject to the blockade. And we think that is what has happened here with these 3 vessels. All right, let's take a look at the 3 vessels, and then I'm going to give you something I usually don't do, my opinion on this situation. This is the June 8th release from U.S. Central Command. U.S. forces disabled an unladen oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman June 8th after the vessel violated the ongoing blockade against Iran by attempting to sail to an Iranian port. U.S. Central Command disabled the Palau-flagged MT Marivex as it transited international waters in the Gulf of Oman toward Iran. An F-18 Super Hornet from USS Abraham Lincoln fired a precision munition into the ship's engineering and steering spaces after the crew failed to comply with directions from U.S. forces. Marivex is no longer sailing to Iran. So attack number 2, UK MTO has received a report of an incident 20 nautical miles northeast of Sohar, Oman. Local authorities have reported a tanker has experienced a fire in the engine room and are on scene assisting with the evacuation of the crew. The vessel is reporting 1 casualty and 2 crew members missing. So this attack will actually result in the death of the 3 Indian crew members: the chief engineer, another engineer, and a cadet on board the vessel. This is the CENTCOM report on June 10th. At 11:14 p.m. on June 9th, U.S. forces disabled an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman for the 2nd consecutive day after another vessel violated the ongoing blockade by attempting to transport oil from Iran. Central Command disabled the Palau-flagged motor tanker Settebello as it transited the Gulf of Oman. A U.S. aircraft fired precision munitions into the ship's engine room after the crew repeatedly failed to comply with directions from American forces. That was the video I showed you at the very beginning. And then the 3rd attack is this one reported by the UK MTO. Received a report of an incident 21 nautical miles northeast of Sohar. Local authorities have reported a tanker has experienced a fire in the engine room. No environmental impact has been reported. This is that strike on it. It is hard to tell if this ship is underway or not. I know you don't see a wake or anything on this, but this is infrared, and infrared does not always show the disturbance in the water very clearly. We have one there on the starboard quarter, and then one almost directly from astern, it looks like, that comes in, because you can already see the smoke coming from the vessel. This is the press release from Central Command on June 11th. U.S. forces disabled an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman 11:20 p.m. on June 10th after the vessel violated the blockade against Iran by attempting to transport Iranian oil, marking the third commercial ship disabled by American forces. Central Command acted against the Guinea-Bissau flagged motor tanker Jolvir as it attempted to transport oil from Iran through the Gulf of Oman. A U.S. aircraft fired 2 Hellfire missiles into the ship's engine room after the crew repeatedly failed to comply with directives from U.S. forces. Earlier this week, U.S. aircraft disabled the Palau-flagged Marivex and Settebello on Monday and Tuesday, respectively. Marivex violated the blockade by attempting to sail to an Iranian port, and Settebello attempted to transport Iranian oil. So this is a clarification on Marivex. CENTCOM forces have disabled 9 non-compliant vessels, redirected 135 ships, and allowed 42 vessels supporting humanitarian aid to pass since initiating the blockade on April 13th. All right, so this is my commentary on these strikes. So first, the United States has initiated a blockade. They went to the letter of the law, and that's international law, in how to announce a blockade. They have announced that the ports of Iran are closed to commercial shipping. They announced that through the appropriate paperwork. You can sit there and say it's a violation of international law, but this is an act of war. And whether the U.S. wants to admit it or not, they are conducting a war operation against Iran. They are at war. I don't care what U.S. Congress says about whether there's a state of war or not. Blockade is a state of war. That is historic. That is traditional. That's what they have here. These ships are violating the blockade. Now, I do have questions about the U.S. action. So, first off, that blockade is legal. Under definitions of international law, it is a legal blockade the U.S. is enforcing. Vessel number 1 was unladen heading toward Iran. This is the reported location of where that strike took place against that unladen vessel inbound to Iran. The U.S. blockade, as identified, goes from the northern east tip here of Oman, heading northeast toward the Iran-Pakistan border. According to UKMTO, the vessel was struck here. Not exactly clear why the ship was hit there. That ship has got a long way to go to get to an Iranian port. It's not in the Gulf of Oman. It hasn't crossed the line identified by General Keane in the briefings they've done at the Pentagon. So striking this vessel at that point does raise some questions to me. The second strike, which resulted in the death of the 3 Indian crew members, were here just northeast of Sohar. And the third strike was in a similar area. What that tells me is there were indications that the Iranians were conducting ship-to-ship transfers of oil. In other words, they were moving oil off their vessels, their Iranian flag vessels, onto other ships. And it is believed that those 2 vessels had loaded Iranian oil. And the U.S. had challenged those vessels not to sail or to be boarded. And instead, the U.S. struck them. What I have a question with here is this. Those ships haven't run toward the blockade line. They're still in the Gulf of Oman. Yes, they have conducted an illegal operation in terms of the blockade, but they had not sailed yet. Was the strike necessary? And this goes back to the larger issue here that I have with the U.S. strikes. I've talked ad nauseum about freedom of the seas on this channel. I've talked about the legality of the U.S. strikes against the drug running boats in the Caribbean. And if the U.S. is going to conduct strikes, whether it's against drug running boats in the Caribbean or against these vessels in the Gulf of Oman or outwards, you have got to dot the I's and cross the T's. You have got to show that you are doing everything necessary to warn those ships off. I know the U.S. says they have, but you have to show it. You literally have to show it because you are starting to look a little bit like the baddies. I know I'm going to get flack from people about this. There's enough people who criticize me all the time and think I'm anti-American and I'm bashing the U.S. military. I'm not. But you have got to go to a next level. You have got to show that this is what we did to warn these ships off. And the crews, understand, the crews on these ships are not signing up to go work on a dark fleet or a sanctioned blockade busting vessel. They are being assigned as vessels and they're going out there. They don't know. They are innocent merchant mariners most of the time in this. Now, there are merchant mariners who are complicit in that, and we just had an example of it this week. You may remember the tanker Bella 1. She was renamed the Marinara. She sailed out of the Caribbean. She was challenged by the U.S. Coast Guard or Monroe, but Monroe was not able to stop the vessel. The ship sailed, so Monroe followed the vessel. The vessel was subsequently boarded and seized off the coast of Scotland. Well, the master of that ship was put into a U.S. federal court. The master of the vessel, a citizen of the nation of Georgia, pled guilty on Thursday in U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia for failing to obey a lawful order to heave to a Coast Guard cutter, and he's going to face sentencing in August. So the master can be held susceptible for this. However, the United States is striking at vessels. They're using F-18s with Hellfire missiles to strike. Surgical, yes, you're not sinking the vessel, but you are inflicting damage. In this case, the death of 3 mariners, including a deck cadet. I think the U.S. has got to go to the next level to explain these actions. The press releases are not enough. They're not. I'm sorry. Admiral Cooper, U.S. Central Command, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, the Secretary Hegseth have got to come out and explain these actions, just like they have to put arguments about shooting the boats in the Caribbean. They are linking them to terrorist organizations. Well, you've got to show what you mean by that. I understand that in the Caribbean, they don't want to give it up because of intelligence sourcing and how they're tracking these boats. This is different in the Gulf of Oman. They are doing this right off the coast of the nation of Oman. They can wait for those vessels to get out. There are 2 aircraft carriers, an amphibious ready group, and at least 12 U.S. Navy destroyers in this region so that they can monitor these vessels. You've got to go to the nth degree to explain your actions, because what we're seeing here is strikes against vessels. Understand, at the same time the U.S. is striking vessels, the Iranians are striking vessels. Back on May 26, the Indian tanker, the Olympic Life, got hit, reported an explosion, and they eventually find out they have a missile warhead lodged into their hull. An Iranian EOD team had to go on board the vessel and actually remove the missile warhead from the ship to prevent it from exploding. And this I think is really significant. India is becoming a major player here. India, which is very dependent on imports out of the Persian Gulf. India, which is one of the largest providers of cruise in the world, is finding itself smack dab in the middle of this. They found themselves in the middle of it during the Houthi attacks on the Red Sea. Indian ships were doing a lot, especially the Indian Navy, to help vessels that have been hit. And now here we have Indian mariners being killed, in this case, 3 of them by the United States. I do want to know, why are we not just stopping these vessels when they head toward the blockade line and turning them around so they're not heading out? Do we have to be disabling them off the coast of Oman? Is it not enough to just turn them around so they can't go out and sail? Obviously, one of the big concerns here is that the ships will head into territorial waters of Pakistan and India and be able to evade or sail through those territorial waters of Oman. I think that may be the case of that first ship. The ship was trying to stay within the 12-mile designated waters of Oman, skirt in, get the oil, and then come back out. So the U.S. is trying to wait for the ship to pop out of 12 miles and potentially hitting it. It's a big challenge. All right. I know it's not a clear answer on my part. I apologize, but this is kind of the perspective I have on it right now. All right, let me take you over to the Strait of Hormuz and marine traffic, because there's some crazy stuff going on in the Strait of Hormuz right now. So this is that lane, that inbound lane into the Persian Gulf that the Iranians are using, and then the outbound lane is right here. You see some vessels here, and I just want to flag them for you. The Koba crude oil tanker. What's interesting to note, it says it's under attack. Then over here, you have the Sophia, SOS, taking fire. Down here, coming into the Strait of Hormuz, the Atomos, pirates aboard. I don't know what the frick is going on here. There is a lot of people playing around with AIS here. We have a U.S. SAR, a search and rescue aircraft that's up in the area. And then we have a proliferation of these navigational beacons here from both the U.S. and the Iranian. So, for example, here you have an Iranian one. This is a fixed structure, they're saying, called the Handala Blocked. Now, I had to look this up. Handala is an iconic Palestinian symbol representing resilience, defiance, and the plight of refugees, created back in 1969 by a acclaimed political cartoonist, Naji El-Ali. So that's the Iranians putting that up. And then you have these structures here being identified by the U.S. And I think some of these may have to do with navigation in and out of the southern lane, maybe marking clear lanes or mined areas in the area that may be. There's old Jersey Devil out there, 404. We think this is an unmanned surface vessel that's operating out there for the United States. We see Handala Failed here, which is a U.S. identification. Devil Drone. Again, I think you cannot take anything on AIS right now in this region very seriously. Now, when we zoom out from the Strait of Hormuz, you'll see the anchorages here off Fujairah, this massive anchorage that's taking place here off Oman. Remember, those attacks took place here outside territorial waters of Sofar. You have ships congregating right now off Dubai, waiting to come out. You have others throughout the entire Persian Gulf waiting for the opening. We see ships coming in, that big anchorage there off Kuwait and off Qasr. And then we know that the Iranians have large numbers of ships here at Shabar and here off Jask. And we are seeing vessels come in. That U.S. blockade line runs right here from that northeast coast of Oman all the way right up here to the Iran-Pakistan border. All right, as we do every week, we want to recap the stories as of week 14. We're going to use our good buddies over at G-Captain for that. So, first story on June 8th, Houthis to impose complete ban on Israeli ships in the Red Sea. I mean, the Houthis are back. I mean, great. So this is exactly what they did back in November of 2023 when they did their boarding on the Galaxy Leader. Did a whole video on this recently talking about it. The fear I have with the Houthis initiating this is it may start spreading to other ships, which is exactly what happened when this happened 3 years ago. The shutdown of the Bab el-Mandeb, cheers, the Gate of Tears right there, is going to be significant if the Houthis do close that down. That's going to shut off oil shipments coming out of Yanbu. It'll stop container shipments and freight heading up to King Abdul and Jeddah for overland transportation across Saudi Arabia. It has the potential to be an economic disaster if that happens. It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened. We haven't seen any attacks on shipping by the Houthis. Second, U.S. sanctions the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Navy unit over Strait of Hormuz toll system. Now, this is part of economic fury. This is the economic aspect of the conflict against Iran, where if you do trade with the IRGC, if you pay that toll, you're going to hit a sanctions list by the United States, which means you're going to have a hard time doing business in the United States. You're not going to be able to do it at all. Third, crew evacuated after suspicious tanker fire near Oman. This is that first attack by the United States against those non-compliant vessels. New build supertanker orders hit record highs, surpassing 2008 peak. Well, tanker market is in full force. I mean, we are seeing movement of goods, both refined and unrefined products around the world. We're seeing rates go up, which means tanker companies have cash in their pocket. And I can tell you as a sailor, if you have money in your pocket, we're going to spend it. And that's exactly what happens. We saw the same thing happen with container ships in 2020. We're seeing the same thing happen with tankers right now. And we're seeing that in the order book being placed in countries like China, Japan, and Korea, with tankers taking the forefront. Kuwait offers oil to Asian buyers for the first time since war. So one of the stories we did this week, and I'll have a link to it above here, was the statement that came out by President Trump that we were secretly moving tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. And one of the things that I did when I broke down that video and the president's statement is say, okay, what evidence is there to support it? This is one of it right here. Kuwait was offering oil to Asian buyers. Why would they do that? Because they haven't been able to move a single drop in weeks. This is because ships of the Kuwaiti Oil Tanker Company, KOTC, Saudi Arabian tanker companies, Bahri, you saw it with the UAE's tanker companies, ADNOC, you saw it with Qatari's LNG carriers. They are starting to move through the straits. And the question is, how are they moving through the straits? And it seems as if the U.S. had restarted Project Freedom and they were escorting vessels out, probably using unmanned surface vessels, but also aerial aspects, helicopters, planes, but they could be using U.S. Navy ships too. We just don't know. This would also help explain another reason why the U.S. is shooting at non-compliant vessels if their destroyers are busy with these escort missions. We just don't know because we haven't got a full briefing out from Central Command, which you don't expect to get because, hey, there's a war on and they don't want to tell you what the hell they're doing. Next, U.S. Energy Secretary says ship traffic through Hormuz increasing meaningful. Again, another piece of evidence here when Secretary Wright goes before Congress and literally spills his guts about this. Again, I have it in the video. Please watch it. It's like, why would you do this, Secretary Wright? Why would you spill out this issue? But he did, so it's what he does. IMO chief, this is Arsenio Dominguez from Panama, warns no safe passage exists in Hormuz despite rising traffic claims. And I think Dominguez is doing exactly what the chief of the IMO should be doing, is raising concerns about this. The unexploded ordnance that was in the Indian vessel, that was a hit by the Iranians. Meanwhile, you have the U.S. hitting other ships with Hellfire missiles. This is not a great environment to be if you're a merchant mariner. Billion-dollar USV builder Saronic scores military rescue milestone near Hormuz. So I got to do a video about this because this is fascinating to me. So one of Saronic's small little Corsair unmanned surface vessels was used to fish out 2 Apache helicopter pilots who ditched in the water. Now, we know the U.S. Navy has been running unmanned surface vessels through the Strait of Hormuz repeatedly. Garks, Corsairs, there's a whole different types of vessels they have. And what's interesting about this is a couple of things. Number one, it took 2 hours for them to get to these guys. So why were these helicopter pilots where they were? Why was there no other assets in place to do it? Second, they boarded an unmanned surface vessel. That's the Corsair there. As far as I know, and I've seen the Corsair at kind of trade shows and demonstrations, there's no easy way to get onto this vessel. You can climb on board the inboard outboard on the back, but I got to tell you, I'm not crazy about the idea of climbing on an inboard outboard motor when there's no one there to turn the motor on and off. Second, they're crashed into the ocean. They're in the water for 2 hours. No telling what kind of shape they're in. I do water rescue. I did ocean water rescue when I was with the U.S. Navy's Military SEAL Command. I do water rescue now. Understand, 2 hours in the water, it is hard to climb up on a boat. It is very difficult to climb up onto a boat that doesn't have ladders and all the accessories to do it. Really interested by it. But I think Saronic is going to run with this. This is a huge thing. The crew was able to get onto the vessel. The Corsair sailed out to meet a U.S. helicopter, and the crew were winched up. Saronic also announced the construction of their first larger vessel. It's a medium-sized boat, a 180-foot vessel called the Marauder. Saronic bought a shipyard down in Louisiana. They converted it from building offshore supply vessels to building these autonomous vessels. They made a big stink about it, that American shipbuilding is back. Calm down a bit, Saronic. It's good, but it's not, we're not pumping out Liberty ships like we were in World War II. It's a good thing, but definitely a topic that needs more analysis. So here, EIA sees weak global oil demand limiting price spike from Hormuz disruption. So the Energy Information Administration has lowered its outlook for global oil demand in 2026. Everyone should be asking themselves, Sal, why is oil not at $200 a barrel? Everybody kept saying, hey, we saw this huge, massive spike. It goes up over $100 a barrel. Now it's down. Why is it down? Well, if you want to understand this, I'm going to send you over to read Anas Haji's post over on X. I think it's probably one of the best synopsises out there on why this happens. And the answer is very simple. It's China. China's demand is down. Basically, the amount of oil they're importing is down. That is because China took a lot of measures in place to offset the potential loss of this. They stockpiled ashore. They're pulling from afloat stores. They have also changed their consumptions quite a bit. And so they've loosened that, and that has helped basically ease the issue. Now, while oil is one factor here, remember, there's a lot of others: liquefied natural gas, liquefied petroleum gas, fertilizer, ammonia, helium, fertilizer. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. Oil is only one element. And while we may not be seeing the massive spike hit that we thought we would see with oil, the other areas have longer term impact. And I think you got to be careful about that. Suez Canal gets oil tanker boost amid Hormuz Strait shutdown. The Suez has been suffering since 2024 with the disruption caused by the Houthi. Saw a massive drop. On average, the Suez Canal makes $10 billion a year that goes to the Egyptian economy. That is about 1/10 of the entire Egyptian budget. Well, in 2024, it was down $7 billion. I mean, that's how big of a hit they took. Now, they've raised tolls, they've done a couple other things, but they have not gotten back to where they need to be. So the fact that they're getting a boost right now is important for the Egyptians. However, it is really the one unencumbered choke point into the Middle East right now. And if something happens to it, it could be catastrophic. First seafarer casualties reported. This is the strike on the second vessel hit by the United States that led to the death of the 3 Indian crew members. Again, I want to say this. I am completely against the targeting of commercial vessels and the death of merchant mariners. Even though the U.S. has put in place all the required restrictions for the blockade, I think they need to go to a better level of discussion about why these vessels are being struck in this way. What are these vessels doing to evade the blockade? Why have you found that the only course of, the only last course here is to use weaponry? We would think that the use of armed weapons would be the last measure. And I think you just have to sit there and say these ships show that they're evading the blockade. What are they doing to evade the blockade? Next, oil tankers go dark to sneak more Gulf barrels through Hormuz. Again, we're seeing this. This is the evidence pointing to 16 tankers clustered together to transfer millions of barrels of oil that have been stranded in the Persian Gulf. This was Tanker Tracker showing ship-to-ship transfers being done, not from Iranian ships to these other vessels, but from Gulf states, from Kuwait, from Bahrain, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, being transferred over to other tankers to get out. One of the reasons you don't have those tankers leaving from the Gulf and just sailing is you have to put U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps detachments on board. We think the ships that are going through the Strait of Hormuz are state-owned vessels by state-owned companies. Those ships can get war risk insurance much cheaper or be self-insured. So there's a lot of measures about why you don't see them leaving, but we are seeing some ships leave. And that's coming from data from Vortexa. We're seeing it from Kepler and a lot of the other commodities traders out there. Trump claims covert U.S. operation helped 200 ships transit Hormuz. Well, that is, again, the president coming out. Talked about in that video. 200 ships sounds great, but remember, on average, prior to February 28th, 138 ships were getting out per day. That's a day and a half coming out. That's what we're seeing. He talked about the fact that 100 million barrels of oil are coming out. That's 5 days worth of oil that was coming out prior to February 28th. Trump administration vows to offset Hormuz tolls with seized Iranian funds. Now, this is an interesting statement because, as you'll see, the proposed memorandum of understanding talks about freeing up frozen Iranian assets to return back to them. Tanker Industry Advisory sheds new light on Trump's secret Hormuz transit operation. So this story by Mike Schuller was really, really good. So Intertanko, which is an advisory group for tankers, prior to the announcement of this route, released a statement, an advisory to its companies about this route. So this is the update that Intertanko gave out on 5 June, talking about that memorandum of understanding. The MOU will set the terms of a more permanent ceasefire between the belligerents. It's been reported that this would be an initial 60-day period in which the Strait of Hormuz would be opened without restriction. The U.S. blockade will be removed. While these negotiations are underway, violence has continued. The U.S. has continued to strike sites, Iranian targets around the Strait of Hormuz, which has been used to launch drones or facilitate attacks against shipping. These U.S. attacks have been in support of shipping within the so-called Omani Route. This is key. The procedure for this route includes close liaison with the U.S. Navy, where timings and waypoints of routes will be passed over. Whilst underway in the route, the U.S. advised that the ship should be blacked out with navigation lights off, radar use should be minimized, and AIS turned off. The navigation situation on the route is difficult with close sailing to the Omani and UAE coastlines. For the deconfliction between vessels, the timing of the inbound and outbound groups, not convoys, enables the ships to pass in wider areas. Around 15 ships use this route per day. Transits take place at night, and the numbers are split between both directions. Intertanko has raised concerns over the safety of navigation and suggested amendments to the routes to facilitate a higher level of navigation safety. Those markers we saw show up in the marine traffic may have something to do with this, because if you can't trust your AIS, you can't turn your radar on, then you need some sort of navigation system to use. And that's maybe what we're seeing. I can't help but note, this is 5 June this came out, and it kind of snuck under the radar of a lot of people, although guys like Mike Schuller over at G-Captain caught it, and hats off to him on that. Shipping industry condemns attacks on seafarers as Hormuz death toll reaches 14. So we had 11 merchant mariners killed by the Iranians and then 3 by the U.S. And so, there is blood on both hands here. And there's no doubt about that. I mean, you have to see what is happening. And again, I try to call balls and strikes as much as I can. I'm an American. I have biases. I'm going to be upfront about them. You can't eliminate every bias. The best thing you can do is try to put as much evidence and facts out there, and go look at different sources too. Don't just rely on me for my information. U.S. ships escort oil tankers through Hormuz at night. Again, another secretary comes out. This is Interior Secretary Burgum, who comes out and says that, man, the Trump administration has a big hard time about being quiet about things. They just really do. Indians grieve and call for action after U.S. strikes killed seafarers. This relationship is a really interesting one. I can't help but note, literally that same day, Trump sent a note to Prime Minister Modi congratulating him on his reelection. Just a very strange relationship. India is playing a bigger and bigger role in the Indian Ocean. Who would have guessed? And they are. You've got Iranian ships hiding in Indian waters. You have Indian Navy on patrol in the Gulf of Oman. They are out there. We see them pop up on AIS all the time. They are playing a bigger and bigger role. And I think India is realizing how much they are really at the mercy of other players when it comes to shipping. It gives rise again to that freedom of navigation and sea power issue we talk about. Lost Gulf oil exports far smaller than thought, traders and shippers say. Again, go back to Nas's statement in X that I mentioned to you. I think what you're seeing is that oil is being substituted in some ways, being made up for in other ways. However, I do think we're not out of the woods with this. Some of that oil that's being made up from is coming a much longer distance, which means we don't have as much of it because it has to travel so far. Ship owners brace for Hormuz reopening as peace deal needs. So listen, as much confusion and consternation there was when the Strait of Hormuz happened, it's going to be on the same way if it opens. It's going to cause disruptions. There's going to be mass waves of shipping moving. We're going to have loading. There's no question that you can load fast at the docks in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf. The problem is, will the receiving ports be able to handle that influx? It's going to be a mess. It is going to take months to reset all of this once it goes. Tanker attack raises new questions about the U.S. secret mission in Hormuz. The UK MTO report on that as of 12 June. A tanker was struck by an unknown projectile in the port bow. The crew was reported safe and no reported environmental impact. The tanker is continuing to its next port of call. So this is probably one of those tankers running out through the southern area by the United States. If you look at that position there, that is in the Oman channel right there that the U.S. is operating. Remember, right when this started, when Project Freedom started, and you got the 2 U.S. ships out, the Alliance Fairfax and the CS Anthem, other ships started to come out, but they were hit. HMM Namu, the CMA CGM San Antonio were hit. And what we think is this is strikes by the Iranians. Now, we don't know what type of strike this was. Probably a missile or a drone strike that got through. This is a good indication about whether or not the U.S. has ships in the area. I tend to think the U.S. Navy may not be in the area with their Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, but maybe just outside the Strait of Hormuz. But it's not clear yet from what the evidence we're getting. All right. Penultimate story here. Trump says he'll sign deal with Iran to reopen Sunday. So what we're hearing today on Sunday, June 14th, is that a deal is in the works. Bloomberg posted this on what's in this draft deal. Nuclear program. Iran commits not to pursue a nuclear weapon and agrees to negotiations within 60 days. U.S. to commit temporarily waiving sanctions. U.S. to commit releasing some frozen assets. Iran agrees to reopen the strait, and the U.S. agrees to lift the blockade within 30 days. It doesn't really talk anything about missiles and proxy. U.S. agrees to withdraw forces from the vicinity of Iran and cap force levels. And the U.S. agrees and includes Lebanon, but Israel is not a party to the agreement. So this led to a very interesting dialogue today between the United States and Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. I think the President of the United States is feeling a little feisty today. It's his birthday. He's got UFC wrestling going on in the front lawn. The Knicks just won the NBA. Go Knicks. And I think the president just unleashed a little bit here. Now, whether this is choreographed or not, we don't know. But one of the most difficult issues here is the trilateral negotiations between Israel, the United States, and Iran. It's a problem. It is a very difficult thing to stop a war. And, tons of books are written about what causes wars. Tons of books are written about wars. Very few books are written about how to stop war. In many ways, what this reminds me of is kind of the end of the Vietnam War, where the U.S. was trying to end the war between South and North Vietnam, but you had the U.S., you had China, you had the Soviet Union. There was multiple players at play here. It was very difficult, and it wound up leading to a stop to the conflict, but within 2 years, North Vietnam overruns South Vietnam, and the conflict kind of keeps going. So I think in many ways, that's the analogy. You're not going to get a surrender on the deck of the battleship Missouri like the end of World War II. End of wars are always compromises. And the U.S. has got to be willing to compromise with Iran because Iran's showing their strong hand, which is the Strait of Hormuz. Finally, Rubio defends Hormuz enforcement after India protests seafarer death. I think this is going to be a big problem for the United States. I think India-U.S. relationships is going to be an issue here. The U.S. is trying to use India more and more as a trading partner, trying to use India to do repairs for U.S. naval forces out in the region. The loss of access into the Persian Gulf means that repair facilities are limited for the U.S. in that region. India is really the fallback. If not, you're heading to Singapore. And the U.S. is finding it very difficult to maintain naval forces out in the Persian Gulf. They are having to commit a large portion of its chartered tanker fleet and auxiliary vessels to keep 2 carrier battle groups, an amphibious strike group, and another amphibious strike group put into a position where they can operate in this region. It is difficult, and it is causing a strain. And I don't care what the Navy says. I know what's happening here. It is very difficult to conduct this operation over a protracted period of time. There is a finite number to this, and they're going to have to readjust and figure out how to continue this operation. And India is really key for that. India is a great staging base. You can get supplies, you can do repairs, and obviously these strikes against these vessels that are violating the U.S. blockade and have Indian crew members on board is an important one to figure out. All right. So we talked about strikes. We talked about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, which is just nutty. Again, go look at marine traffic. Go enjoy that marine traffic image because it's just absolutely nutty. And we recap this week. We're going to keep you posted on everything that happens here, but there's a lot going on. I hope you enjoyed, or at least got something out of today's episode. Listen, we did a lot of videos over this past week hitting on stories that we did a video talking about the two competing dark fleets now, the Iranian dark fleet versus the U.S. dark fleet. I posted some videos yesterday. I was off at a control burn doing training for firefighters here in North Carolina. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I've been a firefighter for 25 years. Training firefighters, posted a couple of video shorts of the event as we were taking firefighters interior, fighting fire, and then we eventually burned down a structure on my university at Campbell University. That structure, by the way, was previously damaged. It had a fire previously. It was a condemned building. They were not going to be able to fix that building, and it was a very old building, and so that's why we let it go at the very end there. Well, I did hope you did get something out of today's video. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. And also make sure you subscribe to the channel. Every now and then, YouTube likes to reset those buttons. I don't know why, they just do, but I do notice it sometimes. Also, if you can, support the page. How do you do it? Well, you can share it across social media, you can give it a big thumbs up, or you can head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Till our next episode, Sal, sign off. Maybe. Gotta find the button. Can't find the button. I hit the wrong button. This is what happens. You stay for the very end of the video, you get to see Sal absolutely screw up in how to stop a video. I'm stopping now.